What you guys can't see is my wife living up to her name, Sassy, standing behind the camera, saying 3, 2, 1, action, and all this kind of stuff, knowing how nervous and uncomfortable I am in front of the camera. So, anyways, this evening we're going to carry on with our Thursday night Bible study, book of Leviticus. As we pointed out last time, in the Hebrew, the book is referred to as Vayikra, which is "and God called," and we get the word Leviticus from the Latin Leviticus, which is a reference to the Levites, the priestly tribes of Levites, and the Hebrews also have another name for it other than Vayikra. It is Torat Kohanim, which is Torah we know is the law, so Torat is the law. Kohanim is the priests, so it's the law of the priests, because Leviticus deals a lot with the laws relating to the priests. So this evening we're going to finish up chapter 19, and we left off last time at verse 19 of chapter 19, so we're going to pick it up in verse 20, and hopefully we're going to get through chapter 20 as well tonight, because in chapter 20 I'm not going to read every single verse, as a lot of it's just repetition, and it's basically laying out the penalties for contravening the laws that were laid down in chapter 19. So before we get into it this evening, let's go to the Lord in prayer, and then we'll get into it, because I certainly need the prayer tonight. Father God, we just thank you, Lord, that even in the midst of all this chaos and everything that's going on in the world around us, that we can still come before you, study your word, be in fellowship one with another, even if it's by technology, and also be in fellowship with you. Father God, we invite your Holy Spirit to lead and guide this evening. Lord, I pray that you bring to mind and remembrance what you have taught this evening, and just take from me what is not of you. And Lord, I pray in all of this that we get to see more of your heart and the reasons for you putting these laws into place as you were transitioning your people from an idolatrous nation into people that were supposed to be separate, holy, set apart to be your people. Lord, may we learn from their mistakes, may we learn from what you were teaching them, may it be applicable to us in our lives and our walk with you. Father, we also just lift up just the various members of the congregation that are sitting at home because of all of this, just with fears and anxieties as this sickness is coming closer to home. In order just to ask that you'd reach out and touch each and every one, Lord, that they would have just that spirit of peace, calmness, just a confidence in you that you are in control, even when the whole world seems like it's out of control. And we thank you, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. So last time out, we'd gotten through pretty much half of chapter 19, and God was basically giving and detailing the ceremonial, or rather the moral code. Chapter 18 dealt with what is known today as the holiness code, because God says to us, "Be ye holy, just as I am a holy God." And I listened to a skit years ago where there was this booming voice, and God was calling out to Noah, and he goes into a dialogue as to what's going on the earth, and he says to Noah, "And Noah, I want you to build me an ark." And a timid little voice from Noah responds, "Well, Lord, what's an ark?" And then he explains, and then he goes on, he says, "And I want you to build it X amount of cubits by this amount of cubits and X amount of cubits high." And Noah responds, "Lord, what's a cubit?" And so the dialogue goes on. And so too here with this holiness code, God tells us, "Be ye holy just as I am holy." And you and I would turn around and say, "Okay, well, what is holiness?" Because we've been misinformed. Hollywood has told us and informed us that holiness is the appearance of angels, bright lights, and harps. Where in the Bible, holiness is defined as being set apart, being separate, being other. So God is essentially saying, "Be ye other, just as I am other." You are to be separate from the world. You are to be other than. There's to be a noticeable difference between you and the rest of the world. And here's how you do it. That was chapter 18, chapter 17, the Holiness Code. And then he goes on in 18, and he lays out with regards to immorality and the worship that they were partaking in, both in the land of Egypt and also the land that they were going to, the land of Canaan, which would later on become Israel. And then in chapter 19, we now start dealing with this thing called a moral code, for lack of a better heading or subtitle, and the different issues of morality. But in fact, if we start digging into this a little more, what we see is God is actually expounding upon the Ten Commandments, because we find the Ten Commandments woven into all of these different laws, as it were, that he's laying down and telling you what not to do and how to do it. And what we're going to see now, as we carry on with this, we're going to see God dealing very, very, in a very detailed manner, dealing with the idolatrous practices that were going on in the land of Egypt and also in the land of Canaan, and how he's going to counteract those. Just as when Moses went before Pharaoh and the 10 plagues, we saw that each one of those plagues was in direct response to a god or a goddess that they were worshipping. For example, the plague of frogs was to counteract the god or the goddess Het, which was a female form with a frog's head, and it was fertility rites and a lot of sexual abhorrent practices, which seems to be the common thread throughout all of these false gods which they worshipped. So picking it up now in Leviticus chapter 19 verse 20, it says, "Whoever lies carnally with a woman who is betrothed to a man as a concubine, and who has not at all been redeemed, nor given her freedom, for this there shall be a scourging, but they shall not be put to death, because she was not free." And if you like me, I would get a frown on my face and say, huh? And not get it, because the whole issue with when the woman that was caught in adultery in Jesus' time, and they brought her before Jesus, and their cry to him was, hey, according to the law of Moses, which is what we're reading right now, this woman's been caught in the very act of adultery, therefore she must be put to death. What do you say? And obviously we know now that was just a plot to entrap him, but the law demanded that she be put to death. Yet here, the very verse here itself says to us that there shall be a scourging, which is an inquiry, not really a whipping as it's been translated. And then he goes on, but they shall not be put to death. So that seems to contradict what was said previously. What is going on here? Okay, so first of all, whoever lies carnally with a woman, a man who is now going to have sexual relations with a woman, the woman here is what they call a bond woman. Some of your translations will translate that as bond woman. It's actually a slave. And in this case, the woman has not worked off her indebtedness. So we term that as a bond slave, indebted to and therefore a bond slave. Just digressing slightly, this word bond slave is what we translate in the New Testament as me being a Christian and I'm a bond servant to Christ. The actual translation, nowhere in the Bible does it ever translate to servant. It translates only one way, and that is slave. So I'm not a servant of Christ or a bond servant. I am a slave. There is no indebtedness by choice, or that I'm just serving God. When God set these Israelites free from captivity in Egypt, they were a slave to the Egyptian taskmasters. God said, I'm going to set you free that you might come in, serve me in Egypt. Go and look at that word again, to be slaves to me. That's what they're coming across for. So they're coming across to worship God. You're either going to be a slave to Satan or a slave to God. But one way or another, you are enslaved. the choice is yours. So here, the woman in this section of scripture here, she is enslaved. Her indebtedness is not worked off yet. She has not been set free, yet she is betrothed. Betrothed is what we would translate here in America as engaged, but it carries a far heavier significance to what we would look at engagement here. Engagement here in America, if two parties are engaged and they kind of get sideways with each other, the ring comes off, they throw it at each other, they walk away, end of story, go and get engaged to somebody else. In the Hebrew culture, if somebody is betrothed or engaged, that would require a paper of divorce. That's how settled that matter is. And oftentimes the betrothal is done by the parents with the kids not even knowing each other. And it is done at a very early age, and then roughly when the girl is roughly about 12 to 14, that's when she will now get married. The young man comes of age as a young man at the age of 13, and they will now begin their lives together. But here, this woman has been betrothed to another man as a concubine. What is going on here is the slave master has promised this woman to another male slave of his, and that is going to be the male slave's wife for the period of time that they are his slaves. In other parts of Scripture, it tells us that, and there's laws concerning slaves, that if a slave comes into his master and he is married, then he is to depart. When he is eventually set free, he is to depart with the wife and the kids that he has in that union in the time of slavery. However, if he comes in by himself, and in the time of slavery is given a wife, which is what's going on right here, then the wife and the children from that union remain with the slave owner once the slave has worked off his indebtedness and is now set free. So it's more of a property thing than anything else. So here, this woman has been promised or betrothed to another slave, and another man has come in, had relations with this woman, being caught, and now, as the Bible says here, so there shall be a scourging, or better interpretation of it, there shall be an inquisition, an inquiry. The phraseology or the word format there with regards to scourging as well also indicates in the Hebrew that there is to be a lashing, a whipping to be conducted, but, and here's the but on this, the language is written in such a way that it's a singular and it's in the female tense. We don't really have that here in America with our English language. Many languages like Latin, they do have a female tense to their words. So here what is being denoted by the way it's written is that it's going to be the female who is whipped after this inquiry is made. She's not to be put to death. And then in verse 21, and there is some debate as to whether or not the male is going to get scourged as well or whipped with regards to this. But in verse 21, and he, that is the male, shall bring his trespass offering to the Lord to the door of the tabernacle of meeting, a ram as a trespass offering. So now the male is to bring a trespass offering to the priest, and there's going to be atonement made for him. Well, why not the female? Well, the female here is a slave. She doesn't own anything. The male here that is being spoken of is a male that is not a slave in this instance, and he therefore has to make restitution. Verse 22, and the priest shall make atonement for him with the ram of the trespass offering before the Lord for his sin which he committed, and the sin which he has committed shall be forgiven him. Right off the get-go, when you look at some of these laws, it doesn't seem fair in that, especially coming from the Hebrew perspective and the way that the Hebrew sages teach these passages, there's a lot of heavy-handedness towards the woman, and the guy seems to go scot-free. Interesting that in Jesus' time, that's exactly what they did. They came to him and they said, Jesus, here's a woman that's been caught in the very act of adultery. What do you say we should do to her? Because the Lord demands that she should be put to death. That's in Deuteronomy 22, I believe it is. Well, in that passage it says that both of them should be put to death, and if she's caught in the very act of adultery, there must be another actor right there with her, being the man. Well, where was he? And that is the issue that Jesus took up with them. Look, you're setting me out through all of this. It's not about the act that was committed. You've got an ulterior motive. Interesting as well that these guys knew exactly where to find this woman committing an act of adultery at that specific time. Stinks like a setup. And then verse 23 goes on. It says now, when you come into the land, notice that God's speaking. He says when you come into the land, not if you come into the land, not anything like that. It's a done deal. From God's perspective, He's speaking from outside of time. He's speaking from the end and seeing the end result before the beginning has even happened. And He's saying to these people here, when you come into the land and have planted all kinds of trees for food, then you shall count their fruit as uncircumcised. Huh? Okay. We'll go on a little bit more and I'll come back and I'll start explaining. 3 years it shall be uncircumcised to you. It shall not be eaten. But in the 4th year, all its fruit shall be holy, a praise to the Lord. And in the 5th year, you may eat its fruit, that it may yield to you its increase. I am the Lord your God. So with respect to this very passage now, just dealing with trees on the surface, looking at this thing at the surface, bear in mind the Jewish teachings or the Hebrew teachings, their sages, what they say is that every single verse, every single piece of scripture is like a diamond that has been cut. And every single diamond that is cut with multi-facets, and they say 70 different facets, 70 different angles. When you hold that diamond up to the light and you turn it, each facet will give you a different perspective and a different view. And so too with the scripture, you can look at it on, they teach 70 different levels. So here on the surface level of all of this, they're still just with the trees, and God is saying something that really indicates that this book is divine, in that He says here, for the first 3 years, when you plant a tree, go ahead and pick up all the buds that are on the tree. Don't let it bear fruit, just pick the buds off. But then in the 4th year, whatever the fruit yields in the 4th year, that is going to be taken up to the temple and it's going to be offered up to the Lord as an offering to the Lord. And then in the 5th year, that's when you're now going to start eating from the tree. Well, here's the interesting thing. If you go and go to modern day orchards and things today, and modern science will show you, the horticultural practices will show you that when you plant a fruit tree, for the first 3 years, pick off all the buds. Thereafter, on the 4th year and on, the fruit that is yielded is going to be stronger, the tree is going to be stronger, more resilient to disease, and also the fruit is going to be larger and sweeter. So we're dealing with a law that was given literally a couple of thousand years ago, and now mankind is now only understanding the science and realizing the validity of what God was saying long before mankind even figured this out. I don't think it's coincidental that God is throwing this in right here because of what we're going to deal with next. Because everything hereafter through the rest of chapter 19 is going to deal with specific gods which were being worshipped by the Hebrew people in Egypt, and specific gods that are going to be worshipped by the Hebrew people in the land of Israel or Canaan when they get there. So God is saying to them, hey, here's something that really shows off that I am God. I've got knowledge that none of these other guys have got, because make no mistake, there are many gods, little g. Even in today's world, Satan is spoken of in the Bible as the god, little g, of this world. There's one God. So there are many gods, and here God's big God, big G God, Yahweh, is now going to deal with these little gods in detail. So dealing with the tree issue, next level of the trees. As you get into the Old Testament and you see when Israel comes into the land of Canaan and it becomes Israel just meaning governed by God, and they are supposed to be a land governed by God, you'll see that they continually fall prey to these false gods and false worship. And in that, a lot of the worship takes place in the groves and up on the high places, on the top of mountains, and it's all beneath trees and things like that. And this, what they used to do with that is the trees, they used to actually cut and shape the trees into phallic symbols in honor of the gods and the worship process that was going on. To say it was weird and perverted, that's putting it politely, but that's what was going on. So here we're dealing with trees as well, and God's saying, the trees are not supposed to be set apart for this. The trees are supposed to be set apart for me and my provision from me to you. And so in the third year, in the fourth year, the tree is sanctified and the fruit is given to God. Thereafter, the fruit is given to God, and thereafter the fruit is now provision for you. So in verse 26, now we're going to get into these false gods. It says here, you shall not eat anything with the blood, nor shall you practice divination or soothsaying. Interesting, when the disciples met and they held a big conference with regards to what do we do with all these Gentiles who are now converting to this thing called Christianity, which at that time period was just another Jewish sect of belief in Yahweh. But now this sect, which followed after Jesus, became known as the Way, and identified Jesus Christ as the Messiah, as the Son of Yah, as God Himself. This sect was now attracting Gentile believers in, and there was a big debate. Okay, so what should these guys do? Do these guys have to first convert to Judaism and then be adopted into this thing called the Way? And if such, then they have to get circumcised, and there's a bunch of different rituals that they've got to do. Or what are we going to do? And the outcome of that, and you can read about it in the book of Acts, the outcome of that is a letter is drafted and then taken to these different believers. And one of the requirements is simply abstain from blood. And abstain from food that is offered to idols, meat that is offered to idols. So this idolatry practice of blood and food is huge in the culture. It was huge in Egypt from where they'd just come, and it was huger, if that's a word, in the land to which they were going, and it was something that was going to plague them for the rest of time. So God addresses it right here. And He says then, okay, so you're not going to eat anything with the blood, nor shall you practice divination or soothsaying. Then we get into the link between the eating or the drinking of blood and divination and soothsaying. The God that is dealt with here is it's Oritel, I believe it is. Oritel, and it's first mentioned with the Nabateans, and then they would sit around in a circle and drink that blood as part of coming into being a oneness with their God. The other thing that was going on with this whole lot is a god called Zenoy. And this, if you go and look that up, you'll find that it comes, these guys, the people who were first worshipping this god was in the Chaldeans. Abraham came from the Ur of the Chaldeans, that area. And this is the god to which they were worshipping. The descendants of these people that were doing this worship came originally from Noah, and it's from Noah's son, Ham. That's where this line and this worship system comes in. And I'm just checking some notes. And the worship system basically was that they were worshipping all the heavenly bodies. And we're talking about here sun worship, moon worship, the stars and things. And what they did is to each of the planets or stars that they recognized, they would assign certain trees. Here comes those trees again. And then metals, stones, and to each one there would be different worship practices, different sacrifices given. So this was a huge worship system, and probably the majority worship system. Excuse me, it's hot as anything in here tonight. That's Texas. One week I'm worrying about heat, and the next week I'm worrying about AC. In this, everything around them was divvied up to these different planets or stars, and therefore belonged to certain gods, and that was worship. So that was the worship system that was going on here, and this drinking of blood. So you can see the procession here, although as God is moving and showing them and setting them apart. First of all, don't mess with the trees. Now don't drink the blood, and you can see it's linked. And then he goes on and he says, okay, so don't practice divination or soothsaying. Divination and soothsaying, tapping into the occultic world. I'm just going to leave that there. Verse 27, you shall not shave around the sides of your head, nor shall you disfigure the edges of your beard. Verse 28, you shall not make any cuttings in your flesh for the dead, nor tattoo any marks on you. I am the Lord. Okay, so with regards to both these two gods that we've just been speaking about now, the practice was with the Arabs of the time, what they would do is they would literally, this is the first bowl cut, if you would, that was invented, and they would literally cut off all the hair from around their heads and just leave this top bit on the top of their heads. And that was to show their allegiance to that God. That was their form of worship. They would do exactly the same with the technology. I love it. They do exactly the same with their beards. Now, unlike today, well, I suppose that dynasty really worships the beard and that, but I was going to say, unlike today, the beard back then was something that was really, really revered and worshipped. It was a serious thing. With regards to that, again, they would disfigure and shave off the beard. The only time a Hebrew person would disfigure the beard, and they wouldn't really disfigure it, what they do is they leave it unkept. And that was as a sign of mourning. If it was total distress, total disaster, the nation was going into captivity, say, then they would literally pluck out their beards. And it was a sign of great lamentation, but also, if it was done to somebody else, it was a disfigurement, it was an embarrassment, it was a humiliation. What did they do to Christ the night before he was crucified? They plucked out his beard. We see this in 2 Samuel. In 2 Samuel chapter 10, Chronicles. In 2 Samuel chapter 10, it speaks, that's Deuteronomy, it speaks of this. In 2 Samuel chapter 10 says, yes. Can I ask you for a paper towel, please? If we have any. That rare item. In 2 Samuel chapter 10, King David is on the throne, and I'll pick it up in verse 1. It says, it happened after this that the king of the people of Ammon died. And, one moment. Thank you. So the king of the Ammonite dies, and verse 2, then David said, I will show kindness to Hanun, that is his son, of Nahash, as his father showed kindness to me. So David sent by the hand of his servants to comfort him concerning his father. And David's servants came into the land of the people of Ammon. And the princes of the people of Ammon said to Hanun, their lord, do you think that David really honors your father because he has sent comforters to you? Has David not rather sent his servants to you to search the city, to spy it out and to overthrow it? So here David's intent is to go and offer his condolences to the son of this fallen king. And the advisors to the son are saying, hey, David's sending in a search party. They're going to have a look and see how best to now attack us. So verse 4, therefore Hanun, the fallen king's son, took David's servants, shaved off half their beards, and cut off the garments in the middle of their buttocks, and sent them away. So this is a prime example of what it meant with regards to a Hebrew man and his beard. Mess with that beard, you are insulting him. It wasn't just with the Hebrews. This was a common practice around those days. It was a shameful thing to happen. Well, have a look in the next line, verse 5. When they told David, he sent to meet them, because the men were greatly ashamed. And the king said, wait at Jericho until your beards have grown, and then return. So you can see the importance to the Hebrew people. The other piece that is mentioned there is that they cut their garments by their buttocks. Today it's almost like a mark of pride to moon someone. But in that culture, in that day and age, if your buttocks were showing, it was great humiliation. And this is what they did in order to humiliate these guys and send them packing. Well, these two nations actually go to war, and hundreds of thousands of people are actually killed just because of this one act. So you can see the importance of this. So back in Leviticus, so God here is saying, in how you honor your gods, with regards to these different planets, the different gods that the people are worshipping, don't give yourself a bowl cut, don't cut your beards. And then he says, verse 28, you shall not make any cuttings into your flesh for the dead. That has a twofold application right there. The first application is that the contact, as we read earlier on, you shall not practice divination or soothsaying. That is dealing with the dead, contacting the dead as to what's going to happen in the future, or if somebody wants to speak to their dead auntie and say hello, whatever it is. So read through that and carry the flow. So we've just been dealing with dead people. Now he has prohibitions as to not to cut your beard, not to give yourself a bowl cut. Don't put cuts on your flesh to the dead. So in honor of these gods and contacting the dead and this worship of the dead, don't put marks on your bodies to that. What they were doing was they were cutting into their flesh, and then you'll see the very next verse there is a prohibition against tattoos, because often with these cuts they would then insert ink into that, and not just ink as we know it, but various dyes and things, and that would then leave a permanent mark like what we call a tattoo today. But this was all in reverence to the God which they served, and many of these gods revolved around death, especially with this that we're dealing with right now. The other application of this, which was going on in that time period, and you still see this, I see this in parts of South Africa, you see this in India, there are parts down in, I believe there's areas in Mexico that do this, there's different places around the world that still do this. And that is, if somebody passes away and it's very close to you, they will cut marks on their faces. And it's a sign of mourning, intense mourning, but it's also worn with pride for the person doing it, in the sense that this is the extent that I have gone to for the loss of that person. It's amazing to me that in Satan worship, the most important day on the Satanist calendar is their birthday. It revolves around I. And just as this cutting on the face is a mark of, look what I have done, look how I have disfigured myself, it always comes back to that I. And yet in our Christian Bible, it's often been said that the center of sin is the I. The center of pride is also I. That's what it comes down to. Those are the two things that I think will lead you away from God the quickest. Pride and sin. So the next one that we get into here is verse 29. Do not prostitute your daughter to cause her to be a harlot, lest the land fall into harlotry and the land become full of wickedness. Here, a goddess that you are going to read about over and over and over again in the Old Testament is Ashtaroth. And you will see that morphs over and over and over again. And the Ashtaroth in that time period was depicted as a multi-breasted woman, and a very, very sensual worship system. Again, sexual deviant practices, and both male and female who were followers of this deity of Ashtaroth would be prostitutes. And this is what we see in the New Testament with the Corinthians. The Corinthians have the same problem there, except there, I believe, if I remember correctly, I think it's Diana is the temple there in Corinth. And again, prostitutes there. And for a 2-year period, both male and female, when coming to a belief or if that's the religion you choose to follow, they would devote 2 years of their life. And every single evening, they would go out prostituting themselves in order to win converts over to their religion. And that is why, again, Paul has to deal with this a lot in his writings with regards to do not uncover your head. If a woman goes into a church, let her head be covered. If a male is in the church, do not let your head be covered, because a male, as a sign that he was a prostitute, he would have long hair. He'd grow his hair long. That's why the Bible says it is a shame for a man to have long hair. That doesn't apply today, definitely. But the female, to denote that she was a prostitute, she would shave her head. Therefore, as a female, cover your head in church, because they were having people coming from this religion converting to this thing called the way of Christianity, coming to church and then sitting there with an uncovered head. Well, you know what that's going to do. I mean, me walking into Staunch Baptist Church with my shorts and my t-shirt and long hair, I spin heads. In that day, in that time period, if a lady walked into a church with an uncovered head and she was bald, indicating that she was a prostitute, can you imagine the scandal? And that's what Paul was combating at that time. So, and this is where it's coming from. So here, do not allow your daughter to be prostituted for this goddess. Then, interesting as well with this, it says here, lest the land fall into harlotry and the land become full of wickedness. In 2 Kings, I believe it is, I want to show you something with regards to King Solomon. Yes. Turn to, actually it's the first Kings. 1 Kings chapter 11. When we think of King Solomon, immediately what comes to mind, well, the first thing that comes to my mind is when God says to him, okay, Solomon, you can ask me for whatever you want, and it's going to be given to you. And Solomon says to God, I'm asking for wisdom on how to govern and rule your people. And I think that is the reason why it strikes me is that it is such a noble and humble thing that Solomon is doing. And God really honors that and gives him wisdom, but then at the same time God says, okay, fine, because you asked for that and not a selfish kind of request, I'm going to give you everything else. And he throws everything else in the pot as well and really blesses Solomon. The next thing that comes to Solomon is the building of the temple. Solomon built that temple for God. And in actually building the temple, when he dedicates the temple to God, he does something in that dedication prayer, and he speaks prophetically in time, and he says that when us as a people, when we've been taken away, and we turn to this place, and we cry out to you, that's when you'll hear from us. So now, if Solomon already is kind of, I don't know if it's under the inspiration of the Spirit, or if he already had an inclination of how the people were going to turn away from God, and that they were going to get led into captivity. But he realized that, you know what, God, if you're going to be residing in this place, in the Holy of Holies, and we turn to you, even once we've walked away, that you'll hear our cries and you'll heal our land. Those are the things we remember Solomon for. But check this out. Chapter 11, verse 1. But King Solomon loved many foreign women, as well as the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Edomites, the Sidonians, and the Hittites, from the nations of whom the Lord had said to the children of Israel, you shall not intermarry with them, nor they with you. Surely they will turn away your hearts after their gods. There's the warning. Next verse. And he had 700 wives, princesses and 300 concubines. There's 1,000 right there. And his wives turned away his heart. Notice this now in verse 4. For it was so when Solomon was old that his wives turned his heart after other gods. And his heart was not loyal to the Lord. That Lord there is capitalized, that's Yahweh. His heart was not loyal to Yahweh, his God, as was the heart of his father David. Verse 5, for Solomon went after Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Amorites. Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord, and he did not follow the Lord, as did his father David. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, on the hill that is east of Jerusalem, and for Molech, the abomination of the people of Ammon. And he did likewise for all his foreign wives, who burned incense and sacrificed to their gods. Interesting, the hill that's east of Jerusalem is Mount of Olives. That's the very hill that Jesus came over and descended into Jerusalem on Passover. And it tells us that he's going to enter back into that city from the eastern gate, which faces Mount of Olives. And it's on this Mount of Olives where here King Solomon, in his old age, has been given over to the worship of false gods and now starts building these temples and these shrines and things to these false gods. Turn back to Leviticus. In Leviticus 20, talking about these false gods, in chapter 20, verse 4, and if the people of the land should in any way hide their eyes from the man who he gives some of his descendants to Molech, we've just been reading about Molech with Solomon, and they do not kill him, then I will set my face against that man and against his family, and I will cut him off from his people, and all who prostitute themselves with him to commit harlotry with Molech, which is exactly what we read Solomon was doing right now. So the question then comes about this great man which we revere in Scripture, who did so much and walked so closely to the Lord and has got so much written in the Bible about him and actually contributed in writings to the Bible, is he in heaven today? Interesting that of the people that were, I think the stat is that the people that were in the last third of their life, so we're dealing with older people that have walked with God, of the people that fall away that are mentioned in the Old Testament, 1/3 of those fell away in the last 1/3 of their life. So here you've got King Solomon, who is the son of David, man after God's own heart, who is brought up obviously in reverence to God, watched his father accumulate masses of wealth, all for the purpose of building this temple, because God told David, you can't build a temple. So it fell upon Solomon. And David spends the latter part of his life just trying to amass everything together. He draws up the plans and everything. We call it King Solomon's temple, but in reality it's David's temple. David planned it. David had a heart to do it. David asked the Lord if he could do it. David amassed the wealth to do it. He does. Solomon builds the temple. So Solomon has this as a goal in his life from the get-go. God speaks directly to King Solomon, tells him, hey, what do you want? He asks for wisdom. God gives him wisdom. God gives him the abundance of everything else. He's got a personal relationship with God. He is anointed by a prophet to be king over Israel, and yet in the last part of his life he falls away. That to me is a very, very, very scary section of Scripture. So then it goes on, and it says in verse 30, You shall keep my Sabbaths and reverence my sanctuary, I am the Lord. So God now institutes the seventh-day Sabbath, and we see that in the Ten Commandments. And it's a new concept because taking a day off just wasn't part of society there. And God says, every seventh day I'm going to give you the day off. And then he institutes the year of Jubilees every 50 years, all debts are cancelled. He does a whole bunch, even with the land. You work the land for 6 years, and in the 7th year, you're going to take that year off. And God says to them, and I'll make sure that you are fed. It's not like you're going to go hungry. You're going to get, the land is going to take care of you. What you harvest in the 6th year is basically going to keep you through the 7th year and the 8th year, because you're going to be then planting your crops. So you're going to have this miraculous crop come the 6th year to see you through. And this is what God does for these people. And he says to them, keep the Sabbath. Trust me in this. How difficult is that to do? When God says to you, say God says to you and I, hey, I want you to work 3 days a week, and I want you to go into the ministry for the other 3, and then you take the 7th day off. How many of us could really and truly walk in faith, in the sense of, okay, so I'm going to go from a full-time paying job to working just 3 days a week, and trust God that He's going to meet my expenses and put food on the table? That is essentially what He's saying to these Hebrew people. And He talks about this, you shall keep my Sabbaths and reverence my sanctuary. They go hand in hand. The sanctuary, we refer to it today as the church. I don't believe in reverencing a building. If this building here, as beautiful as it is, it began its history as a dance hall. One can only imagine what happened in here over the years. I shudder to think. But it's not about the building. Although this building definitely speaks to how God can restore and redeem. There's a verse that talks about God will redeem the years that the locusts have eaten. The locust is a reference to Satan. And what he has eaten and defiled in the first part of your life, once you save, God will restore that and redeem it and give it back to you, just like this dance hall. And then in verse 31 it says, now, my Bible reads, give no regard. That's not the translation. The real translation is don't be given over to. In other words, don't turn to mediums. Don't start worshipping that kind of stuff. Don't look to it. So it says, give no regard to mediums and familiar spirits. The word there, mediums, in some of our translations it's going to read wizardry. A medium, again, the better translation for that is a necromancer, one who has contact with the dead or with familiar spirits. You will see that in later on in the Bible, this word is translated many times as familiar spirits. The word itself, though, in the Hebrew is, I wrote this down, is yadunah, which is a bird. So what was happening in that time period, in this day and age, and what they were going to encounter in Canaan, is there were certain people that were posing as mediums and making a lot of money out of it. And what they would do is they take a bone from this bird called yadunah, and they put that bone in their mouth. And then they would light incense, and then they would supposedly go into a trance. And in the trance, the bird would fly them away to the dead, and they'd be able to get information and come back and give that to you. So the bird being the yadunah, these guys were then called the yadunai. So that's what they were known as, yadunai. Now, why have they got the bone in their mouth? Interesting, because the part of the worship system in that day and age was to a god Oboth. Oboth. And Oboth would speak in a very deep and hollow voice, and it would come from the belly of a person. What the Hebrew sages write, that it would come from the armpits, or it would come out of the chest, and it would be as though it was out of a hollow bottle. These guys had a bone in their mouth. So therefore, if you've got a bone in your mouth, you can't really speak. This is the first evidence or hint of ventriloquism. And what these guys were doing was basically putting a bone in their mouth to show you, look, I can't talk, I've got a bone in my mouth. But they were able to throw their voice and that hence the hollow sound. Where it came from, they didn't know, so they were saying, oh, maybe, probably coming out of their armpits or out of their chest. And they were supposed to be communicating with the dead. Now, the way I've just worded it, supposed to be, I haven't given much credence in that to they were actually communicating with the dead. That's on the surface level. Is there communication with familiar spirits? Most definitely. I believe in it 100%. We scoff and we mock and we look at things like Ouija boards and there's really nothing in it. But the Bible says something totally different. And this warning here, don't be given over to mediums and familiar spirits. Well, if God is saying don't be given over to them, what is God saying? That yes, they exist. Otherwise, God would have simply said, just don't be stupid, because it's not real. But He's telling you, and the Bible, there's so much in the Bible that deals with this. So, notice what He says. Do not seek after them to be defiled by them. I, the Lord, your God. God's saying, I'm God. If you want answers, come and ask me. Don't go to these dimwits and ventriloquists and things like that. Don't go to these guys that are seeking after the dead. There's many verses talking about, what has life got to do with death? What has darkness got to do with light? And there's a separation that should be there. And then it goes on in verse 32. It says, you shall rise before the grey-headed and honor the presence of an old man and fear your God, I am the Lord. Here's an honoring of the aged and of wisdom. In the book of Job, don't go there, but in the book of Job, one of Job's buddies who comes in at the very end and he's going to give his advice, he starts off and he says, these other guys were older than me, so I'll let them speak first. And they were supposed to speak the voice of wisdom, but what do they know? And in the Hebrew, there is a word obi, and it's this God, this Abath. And here, this guy that is speaking, he says that I'm going to speak from my belly. You can go read it in Job chapter 32, verse 19, 18, 19, around that area. And he says he's saying to Job, I was going to allow the older people to speak first, and they should have spoken wisdom, but what do they know? And this was the practice of that day. These people were getting into soothsaying, and therefore pushing out the wisdom of the old people. Well, if you can't respect an old person who has wisdom that's walked before you, how do you respect God, who has walked before you, who is the picture of wisdom? So too with our elderly. Oftentimes I will be told by some of my more wiser friends here in the church, don't stand up. And I find that very hard to do. Something that I've done all my life is if an older person walks in, I stand up. In fact, if a person walks in that I have any respect for, I stand up. That's just me. And I think it's a good practice. I think it sets us apart, just as God is saying here, be different, set apart. You shall rise before the grey-headed and honor the presence of an old man and fear your God. Catch the last little bit there, and fear your God. If you don't want to honor the old person, watch out. And 33, and if a stranger dwells with you in your land, you shall not mistreat him. The stranger who dwells among you shall be to you as one born among you, and you shall love him as yourself. For you were strangers in the land of Egypt. That verse is highlighted in my Bible, because what it speaks to me quite right off the bat is, just as they were captive to the Egyptian taskmasters, just as we were captive to Satan, our taskmaster, God has saved us, set us apart, and we are strangers. We were strangers in a strange land, and God brought us into His side. Now, the next person who isn't in church yet, he's a stranger. But we were that stranger as well, and that's why it's highlighted in my Bible. For you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Verse 35, and you shall do no injustice in judgment, in measurement of length, weight, or volume. You shall have honest scales, honest weights, an honest ephah, and an honest hin. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt. Now, with regards to trade, being fair, because these different things here, the weights and the scales, we know what the weights and the scales are to measure commerce and that. The other thing that they would measure with is an ephah and a hin. Those are both measurements in which you pour, say, flour, rice grain, whatever. So he's saying with your dealings with regards to trade, be honest, be different. I've said before, if you go down into the trade area in Israel today, in Jerusalem, there's two different sections, and if you go into one section, you best stand back and just kind of watch where the person you're going to be buying from reaches underneath the counter to which set of weights he's going. And when you're going to buy something from him, insist on the set of weights that he's been using with his friends. It'll be different to the other set. Verse 37 is going to be the last verse. Guess we're not going to get through chapter 20. Verse 37, therefore you shall observe all my statutes and all my judgments and perform them. I am the Lord. That's not a suggestion. God is simply saying, if you want to be in this thing called Christianity, if you want to be a part of me, if you want to come and live in my house one day, these are my rules. My house, my rules, end of story. There's no debate. Now, you and I can look at some of these verses, as I pointed out with that one verse with regards to the young lady who was a slave. And we can say, well, that's not fair. Bottom line, God's house, God's rules. If you don't like the rule, then what I suggest you do is take it up with God, because I can guarantee you, when something upsets you in the Bible or gets under your skin, and you start really searching it out, spending time searching it out, it's amazing how God will speak to you through that. And over a period of time, whether it is a month or whether it is a couple of years, it is amazing how much truth you will find around one little piece of scripture that just gets under your skin. It's like God's kind of just getting your attention and He's saying to you, hey, come talk to me about this. And over time, and if you're diligent with it, it's amazing how it just continues to speak and speak and speak and reveal truth to you over something that initially you found upsetting. And at the end of time, just like in Revelation, it says that each one of us will turn to Him and say, righteous and true are your judgments, O Lord. That's when we'll get the big picture and a full understanding. Let's close in a word of prayer. Father God, we've covered a bunch this evening, and the emphasis has been what seems like just the worship of false gods and getting caught up in false religions and drawn away. And it's I don't think it's untimely or coincidence, just in this time of fear and uncertainty, how people are not putting their faith in you. And we see craziness. We look at these verses and we think, it's nuts, drinking blood, making your daughter become a prostitute for some goddess, putting kids into fire and offering them up as a human sacrifice. And this is just totally crazy. How could they do this? And then we go to the store and see no toilet paper on the shelves. And that seems to be what we're putting our faith into today. We're putting our faith in ourselves, in storing up and hoarding up. And yet you say to us time and time and time again to turn to you and just to come and spend time communion with you, getting our lives straight, that one day we might be with you for all of eternity. I pray, Lord, that as we dug into these scriptures tonight, that we'd see that these books that are typically regarded as boring, as not applicable, just stuff, history, I pray that we'd see the relevance, the incredible beauty that is in these books, and how rich they actually are when we start to dig in and just do a little bit of work. I'm reminded of that verse where you tell us, Lord, that it's to your good pleasure to hide a thing or to conceal a thing, and it's to the glory of kings to seek it out. Lord, you tell us that we are kings, we are priests, and we are prophets. That's what you've turned us into. May we live up to that, Lord, and really search you out in these scriptures. So we thank you, Lord. We thank you for this time this evening. In Jesus' name, amen. Really missing my church family. Good night all.